She actually thinks I still want this marriage. She's the only one still trying.
But he didn't know his wife was standing just outside the door. And what she did next would change everything.
You won't have to pretend anymore.
Evelyn stopped with her hand on the dining room door. Inside, her husband was laughing. Not the quiet laugh she had known when they were young and still struggling to build a life together. This was different, careless, cruel. The kind of laugh a man gave when he was certain the person being discussed could never hear him. Daniel sat at the head of the long marble table, surrounded by 6 of his closest friends. Expensive wine filled their glasses. Soft music played in the background. One of the men leaned back and grinned. "So, Daniel, are you and Evelyn finally fixing things?" The room became quiet for a moment. Daniel smiled. Then he laughed. "Fixing things?" Another man chuckled. Daniel picked up his glass. "She's the only one still trying." The men laughed. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the door handle. She didn't move. Daniel continued. "I've told her 100 times that things aren't the same anymore, but she keeps planning dinners, buying gifts, writing me those ridiculous little notes." One of his friends shook his head. "Maybe she really loves you." Daniel laughed again. "Or maybe she just can't accept that I'm done." Evelyn felt something inside her crack. She had spent years telling herself that Daniel was tired, that his company had changed him, that the pressure of being a billionaire had made him distant. She had defended him when people whispered that he didn't appreciate her. She had defended him even when he didn't defend himself. But now she was hearing the truth from his own mouth. One of the men asked, "Does she know you're finished?" Daniel shrugged. "She'll figure it out eventually. What if she leaves?" Daniel smiled. "Evelyn," he laughed. "She'd never leave me." The room erupted again. Evelyn slowly looked down at her left hand. The wedding ring Daniel had placed there 12 years earlier suddenly felt heavier than it ever had. She remembered his voice on their wedding day. "I'll never make you question whether you're loved." A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away before anyone could see. Then, without making a sound, she twisted the ring from her finger. She held it in her palm. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. Then she closed her fingers around it and walked away. Daniel never saw her, and that was exactly what made what happened next so devastating. The following morning, Daniel walked into the kitchen expecting his usual breakfast. He stopped. The table was empty. No coffee. No newspaper placed beside his chair. No warm greeting. He looked toward the hallway. "Evelyn." No answer. He frowned. "Evelyn." She appeared a moment later. She was dressed simply, her hair neatly pulled back. Daniel studied her. "You're up early." "Yes." "Where's breakfast?" Evelyn looked at him. "I didn't make any." Daniel blinked. "You didn't?" "No." He waited for an explanation. None came. Finally, he said, "Are you upset about something?" Evelyn looked directly into his eyes. "You were right." Daniel's expression changed. "About what?" She paused. Then she said quietly, "I was the only one trying." Daniel stared at her. For the first time, he felt something he couldn't explain. Fear. But his pride wouldn't let him admit it. He scoffed. "Evelyn, don't start this again." "I won't." She walked past him. Daniel turned. "Wait." She stopped. He looked at her hand. Something was missing. "Where's your ring?" Evelyn looked down. "I took it off." "Why?" She looked back at him. "Because I finally listened to you." Daniel's face hardened. "You're being dramatic." "No." She shook her head. "For the first time, I'm being honest." She walked away. Daniel remained standing in the kitchen. He had spent years believing his wife would always be there. He had mistaken her patience for weakness. He had mistaken her love for dependence. And he was about to learn how expensive that mistake could become. 12 years earlier, Evelyn and Daniel had been different people. They had lived in a small apartment with unreliable heating and a kitchen so tiny that they could barely stand in it together. Daniel had dreamed of building a company. Evelyn had believed in him before anyone else did. One night, Daniel had sat across from her at their tiny kitchen table. "I don't know if I'll ever make it," he admitted. Evelyn reached across the table and held his hand. "You will. What makes you so sure?" "Because you don't quit." Daniel smiled. "And if I fail? Then we start again." He leaned toward her. "You'd really stay?" Evelyn smiled. "I married you, Daniel. Not your future bank account." He kissed her hand. "I'll remember that." And for years he did. Until success arrived. His company exploded. The small apartment became a mansion. The old car became a fleet of luxury vehicles. The man who once counted every dollar began signing checks worth millions. And slowly, the woman who had stood beside him through everything became invisible. At first, the changes were small. Daniel started missing dinner, then anniversaries, then conversations. Evelyn kept making excuses. "He's busy. He has investors coming. His company needs him." But eventually, even she couldn't pretend anymore. One evening, she waited for him until nearly midnight. When Daniel finally walked through the door, she was still sitting at the table. "You're home." He loosened his tie. "Yes, I kept dinner warm. I'm not hungry." Evelyn looked at him. "Daniel, can we talk?" He sighed. "About what?" "About us." "Evelyn, I'm exhausted. So am I." He stopped. She continued. "I've been waiting for you for months." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Can we do this tomorrow?" "You always say tomorrow." He looked irritated. "Because I have responsibilities. And I don't." He stared at her. "What do you want from me?" Evelyn's voice softened. "I want my husband." Daniel said nothing. She swallowed hard. "I don't want the mansion. I don't want the cars. I don't want your money. What do you want?" "I want the man who used to sit with me in that tiny kitchen and tell me his dreams." Daniel looked away. "That man doesn't exist anymore." The words stayed between them. Evelyn felt her heart sink. But she still didn't leave. Because somewhere inside her, she believed the man she loved was still there. She just didn't know how much longer she could keep searching for him. And Daniel had no idea that Evelyn had already begun preparing for the day she would finally stop. For the next several weeks, Evelyn tried one more time. Then another. And another. She stopped asking Daniel for expensive gifts. She stopped asking him to take her on vacations. She stopped asking him to attend glamorous parties with her. She asked for something much simpler. Time. One evening, she stood in Daniel's office while he stared at 3 computer screens. "Daniel. Can you look at me?" He continued typing. "What is it?" "I made dinner. I'm working." "I know." He finally glanced at her. "Then why are you standing there?" "Because I wanted us to eat together." "I'll eat later." "You said that yesterday." Daniel sighed. "Evelyn, please." She swallowed. "Do you still love me?" His fingers stopped moving. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel leaned back. "Why do you keep asking me that?" "Because you never answer." "Because I shouldn't have to." Her eyes filled with tears. "I shouldn't have to wonder either." Daniel looked away. "I'm tired." She nodded slowly. "Okay." She walked out. But she didn't give up. That weekend, she planned something Daniel hadn't experienced in years. She recreated their first date. She found the old restaurant. She contacted the chef and asked him to prepare the same meal they had ordered 12 years earlier. She wore the simple blue dress Daniel had once told her was his favorite. And when Daniel walked in, she was waiting. He stopped when he saw her. "What is all this?" Evelyn smiled nervously. "Our first date." Daniel looked around. "You remembered?" "I remember everything." He sat down. For the first time in months, they looked at each other without a phone between them. Evelyn reached across the table. "Daniel, I don't need you to become the man you were 12 years ago." He raised an eyebrow. "I just need you to care about what happens to us." Daniel looked at her hand. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if we can start again." He was quiet. Evelyn's voice trembled. "Not as billionaire and wife, just as Daniel and Evelyn. Daniel leaned back. You know it isn't that simple. Why? Because people change. So we change together. That's not how life works. Then tell me how it works. Daniel stared at her. She continued, because I'm tired of being married to a man who lives in the same house but feels like a stranger. Daniel's jaw tightened. Evelyn, I don't have time for this. Her face fell. You don't have time for your marriage? I have a company to run. You always have a company. Yes. And what do you have for me? Daniel pushed his chair back. I can't keep having the same conversation. Evelyn whispered. Neither can I. He stood. I'm going home. She looked at him. We're already home. Daniel walked away. That night, Evelyn sat alone in their bedroom. She opened an old wooden box. Inside were photographs. Their first apartment. Their first Christmas. Their wedding. Daniel holding her after they had lost their first major business opportunity. She touched one photograph and smiled through her tears. You used to love me, she whispered. Then she looked at the empty side of the bed. Where did you go? But Daniel wasn't asking himself that question. He was becoming increasingly convinced that Evelyn was simply too emotional, too attached, too dependent. He didn't understand that every time he dismissed her, he was pushing her closer to a decision he would eventually regret. 3 days later, Daniel hosted a dinner for several business associates. Evelyn was expected to attend. She almost didn't, but she remembered what her mother had once told her. Never make an important decision while you're angry. So Evelyn decided she would attend one final event as Daniel's wife. She put on an elegant dress. She fixed her hair. She smiled when guests arrived. Nobody knew what was happening inside her. Daniel barely noticed her. He moved from guest to guest, laughing and shaking hands. At one point, Evelyn approached him. Daniel, can we talk later? About what? Us. He glanced around. Not tonight. She nodded. Okay. Later that evening, Evelyn stepped away from the crowd. She needed air. She walked toward the hallway. That's when she heard voices coming from the private dining room. She recognized Daniel immediately. One of his friends laughed. You know, Daniel, your wife is still crazy about you. Another voice said, she probably thinks you'll eventually come around. Daniel laughed. Evelyn stopped. Her heart began pounding. Then Daniel spoke. She can think whatever she wants. Someone asked, so you're really done? Daniel answered without hesitation. Completely. Evelyn's breathing became shallow. Then his friend laughed. What does she think she's going to do? Daniel answered, nothing. The men laughed. Daniel continued, she'll be back tomorrow morning pretending nothing happened. Evelyn closed her eyes. She could hear every word, every laugh, every cruel assumption. Then one of the men asked, you really think she'd never leave? Daniel's response destroyed the last piece of hope she had. Evelyn, he laughed. She'd never survive without me. Evelyn opened her eyes. For years, she had wondered whether Daniel still loved her. Now she finally had her answer. But something else happened too. The fear she'd carried for years disappeared. She wasn't afraid anymore. She stepped away from the door. Her eyes were wet, but her face was calm. She walked into the guest room, opened her handbag, and pulled out the wedding ring she had removed that morning. She looked at it one last time. Then she placed it inside a small envelope. On the envelope, she wrote one sentence. You were right. She left the envelope on Daniel's desk. Then she packed a small suitcase. She didn't take the expensive jewelry. She didn't take the designer clothes. She didn't touch the money in their joint account. She took only the things that belonged to her before she became Mrs. Carter. Before leaving, she stood in the doorway of their bedroom. She looked around. The room where she had cried. The room where she had waited. The room where she had spent countless nights hoping Daniel would come home early. Then she whispered, I'm done, and walked out. The next morning, Daniel woke up expecting everything to be normal. He reached for his phone. No message from Evelyn. He walked downstairs. No breakfast. No coffee. He frowned. Evelyn. Silence. He walked through the house. Her closet was half empty. Daniel stopped. What the hell? He hurried into the bedroom. Her suitcase was gone. His eyes fell on the envelope sitting on his desk. He opened it. The wedding ring dropped into his palm. Daniel stared at it. Then he unfolded the paper. 3 words were written inside. You were right. His face went pale. For the first time in 12 years, Daniel felt genuine panic. He called her. Straight to voicemail. He called again. Nothing. He grabbed his keys and rushed outside. But Evelyn was already gone. And Daniel still didn't understand the truth. She hadn't left that morning. She had been leaving for months. He just hadn't noticed. If this story is already pulling you in, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because what Daniel discovered next would completely change the way he understood the woman he had spent years underestimating. Because the wedding ring wasn't the most important thing Evelyn had left behind. There was something else. Something Daniel hadn't found yet. And when he finally discovered it, the billionaire who had laughed at his wife's devotion would wish he could take every word back. Daniel drove through the city like a man who had forgotten how to breathe. He called Evelyn again. Nothing. He called her assistant. Where is she? There was a pause. Mr. Carter, I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you. Daniel's voice hardened. I'm her husband. Another pause. She asked me not to tell you where she was going. Daniel froze. She asked you that? Yes. When? 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. Daniel gripped the steering wheel. What did she say? She said that if you ever called asking for her, I should tell you she needed time. Time for what? The assistant hesitated. To decide whether there was anything left to save. Daniel ended the call. He stared through the windshield. 3 weeks ago. That was before the dinner. Before the laughter. Before he had told his friends that Evelyn would never leave. She had already been preparing. He simply hadn't noticed. When Daniel returned home, he found himself walking through rooms that suddenly looked unfamiliar. Her favorite chair was empty. Her books were gone. The small vase she always kept beside the window was missing. Even the framed photograph from their 10th anniversary had disappeared. Daniel walked into his office. The envelope was still on the desk. He picked it up again. The ring was inside. He stared at it. Then he noticed something beneath the envelope. A second piece of paper. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. It was a list. At the top, Evelyn had written, "Things I tried." Daniel began reading. Dinner together. He remembered the nights she'd waited. Talking. He remembered telling her he was too busy. Counseling. He remembered refusing. Weekend away. He remembered canceling it for a business meeting. Anniversary. He remembered forgetting. Starting over. He remembered walking away. Daniel's eyes moved down the page. At the bottom were 4 words. I ran out of ways. Daniel sat down. For several minutes he didn't move. Then his phone rang. It was his mother. Daniel, where is Evelyn? He didn't answer. Daniel. She left. What? She left me. His mother went silent. Then she asked, why? Daniel looked at the list. I don't know. His mother sighed. Don't lie to me. Daniel closed his eyes. I thought she would always stay. His mother spoke quietly. That isn't love, Daniel. He opened his eyes. What? That's entitlement. The word hit harder than he expected. His mother continued. You didn't lose Evelyn because she stopped loving you. Daniel swallowed. You lost her because you kept believing her love had no limit. Daniel ended the call. For the first time, he understood something terrifying. He had spent years measuring Evelyn's love by how much disrespect she could tolerate. And every time she forgave him, he became more careless. He grabbed his coat. He knew where he needed to go. He drove to the place where he and Evelyn had first met. A small coffee shop downtown. He remembered the first day clearly. Evelyn had been sitting near the window reading a book. He had accidentally knocked her coffee over. She had laughed instead of getting angry. Daniel smiled bitterly. He had once thought that moment was the beginning of his greatest success. Now it felt like the beginning of everything he had ruined. He sat at the same table and waited. Hours passed. Evelyn never came. Meanwhile, Evelyn was sitting in a small apartment across town. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't impressive. But it was quiet. For the first time in years, she could hear herself think. Her phone was filled with missed calls. She didn't answer. Not because she wanted to punish Daniel. Because she knew that if she heard his voice too soon, she might remember the man she had loved. And she couldn't go backward. Her friend Claire sat beside her. "You okay?" Evelyn nodded, then shook her head. "I don't know." Claire took her hand. "You don't have to know today." Evelyn looked at the wedding ring sitting inside the envelope. "I loved him so much. I know. I would have forgiven almost anything." Claire looked at her. "But not everything." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "No." She wiped them away. "I kept thinking if I loved him enough, he'd remember who he was." Claire whispered. "And did he?" Evelyn shook her head. "No." She looked toward the window. "I think I was trying to save a marriage that only existed in my memories." That night, Daniel finally found Evelyn. He stood outside the apartment door. When Evelyn opened it, she froze. Daniel looked exhausted. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His hair was disheveled. He looked nothing like the confident billionaire everyone knew. "Evelyn." She said nothing. "Please. Why are you here?" "Because I need to talk to you. You've had 12 years to talk." "I know." He stepped closer. "I was wrong." Evelyn's eyes hardened. "About what?" "Everything." "That isn't an answer." Daniel swallowed. "I thought you'd always be there." "You did." "I thought you needed me." "I did." "Then why did you leave?" Evelyn stared at him. "Because I finally realized needing someone isn't the same as being loved by them." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "I love you." Evelyn looked away. "Don't say that now." "It's true." "Maybe." She looked back at him. "But why did you need to lose me before you could say it?" Daniel had no answer. He lowered his head. "I don't know." Silence filled the hallway. Then Daniel whispered, "Tell me what I can do." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "That is the problem, Daniel." He looked at her. "I spent years telling you." He stepped closer. "I'll change." "You've promised that before." "I mean it this time." "You meant it last time too." "I'll prove it." Evelyn shook her head. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." She looked at him for a long moment. "You thought I was trying to keep you." Daniel frowned. "I wasn't." "I know. I was trying to save us." Daniel's face fell. "I know." "No, you don't." Her voice cracked. "You thought I was desperate because I kept trying." She wiped away a tear. "I wasn't desperate." Daniel couldn't speak. "I was loyal." That word destroyed him. Evelyn continued. "I was loyal to the vows we made." She looked down. "I was loyal to the man I thought you were." Then she looked directly into his eyes. "But when I heard you laughing about me," her voice became quieter. "That was the moment I realized I was the only one still honoring those vows." Daniel began crying. "I didn't know you were there." "I know. I didn't mean for you to hear it." "That doesn't make it better." "I was trying to look strong in front of them." Evelyn stared at him. "So you made me small to make yourself look powerful?" Daniel closed his eyes. "Yes." The honesty hurt. But somehow it was the first honest answer he'd given her in years. Evelyn opened the door wider. Then she said, "Go home, Daniel." "Evelyn, go home. Is this really over?" She looked at him. "I don't know." Daniel's eyes lifted. "You don't know?" "No." She took a breath. "But I know this." "What?" "If there is ever a chance for us again, it won't be because you bought me something." Daniel nodded. "It won't be because you begged." He nodded again. "It won't be because you're afraid of being alone." Daniel's voice broke. "Then what will it take?" Evelyn looked at him. "Time." She closed the door. Daniel stood outside for several seconds. Then he walked away. For once, the billionaire didn't try to force an outcome. He simply accepted that some things couldn't be purchased. Weeks passed. Daniel changed slowly. Not with grand gestures. Not with expensive gifts. He started therapy. He apologized to the people he had treated poorly. He began leaving the office at reasonable hours. He started listening. And Evelyn noticed, but she didn't rush back. Because forgiveness wasn't the same as forgetting. One evening, Daniel returned to the small coffee shop where they had first met. Evelyn was already there. He sat across from her. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Evelyn smiled faintly. "You're early." Daniel smiled. "You used to complain that I was always late. I remember everything now." Evelyn looked at him. "That's a dangerous thing to say." "Why?" "Because remembering isn't the same as changing." Daniel nodded. "I know." He reached into his pocket. For a second, Evelyn thought he was pulling out jewelry. Instead, he placed a folded piece of paper on the table. "What is that?" "A promise." She opened it. It wasn't a contract. It wasn't a business proposal. It was a handwritten list. At the top Daniel had written, "Things I should have done before I lost her." Evelyn read the first line. "Listen." The second, "Make time." The third, "Appreciate her." The fourth, "Never make her beg for love." Her eyes filled with tears. Daniel looked at her. "I can't change what I did." "No, but I can change what I do next." Evelyn folded the paper. She didn't promise to return. She didn't promise that everything would be okay. She simply said, "Then start there." And for the first time in years, Daniel understood something money had never taught him. A marriage isn't saved by the person who loves harder. It's saved when both people decide the other person's heart is worth protecting. Evelyn eventually gave him another chance. But it wasn't the old marriage. It was a new one built slowly. One where Daniel learned that success meant nothing if the person waiting at home felt alone. And Evelyn learned something too. Loving someone deeply never meant she had to abandon herself to keep them. The wedding ring eventually returned to her finger. But this time, she didn't wear it because she was afraid to lose Daniel. She wore it because Daniel had finally learned how to earn the trust behind it. And the night he once laughed and said she was the only one still trying became the night that changed everything. Because he had been right about one thing. She had been the only one trying. But he had been completely wrong about another. He thought she would never leave. She did. And that was the only reason he finally understood what he had almost lost. So, if Evelyn's story taught you anything, let it be this. Sometimes the quietest goodbye is the loudest warning. Sometimes a person doesn't stop loving you. They simply stop begging you to love them back. And sometimes the person you assume will always be there is the person you should have valued while they were still trying. If you were Evelyn, would you have given Daniel another chance after everything he said? Or would you have walked away for good? Tell me honestly in the comments. And if this story touched you, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Because sometimes the person you underestimate isn't powerless. They're simply patient. And when patience finally runs out, the entire relationship can change in a single night.